Hello everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel YNR Daily Spoiler. DNA Nightmare. Victor reveals the truth that destroyed Daniel forever.
Phyllis's deception permanently destroys Daniel, as Victor reveals a DNA bombshell. Phyllis Summers did what she believed she had to do years ago, when the world felt different and decisions were made in panic rather than with advice. She lied, not out of malice or to make headlines, but to prevent a greater cruelty she imagined for Daniel, the boy in her arms. The lie was straightforward on the surface, but profound on the inside. Phyllis falsified documents and changed a paternity test to name Daniel's father as someone who would protect him from the Newman's grasp. She repeatedly reminded herself that identity could be changed if it prevented a child from being used as a pawn. Phyllis is permanently at home in the gray. She has loved loudly and miscalculated loudly, and in private she has carried the lie like an amulet, an imperfect vow to protect. That deception formed the cornerstone of Daniel's existence, influencing his education, the people who reared him, and the occupations he pursued. However, Genoa City maintains documentation, and the past ultimately unravels like a poorly sewn seam. A file opens. Victor Newman's private archives, a climate-controlled room where old files breathe like memories, is where it all starts. When Victor's team opens boxes of old medical affidavits, they discover something odd, a sample log from a hospital lab, a donor number that shouldn't have matched the file in front of them. The paper trail is crooked, annotations, a red pen correction, an old lab code that cross-references to a Newman donor profile, and an irregularity in last quarter's trust allocations linked to the Newman family's philanthropic funds. The lab records hide a switch, a DNA sample labeled for one child that was applied to another. Someone changed the chain of custody years ago. It's tiny, technical, and devastating. A forensic signature of fraud. Victor pricks at the seam's edge, and the seam splits. Victor takes a hard, narrow interest. Phyllis Summers is the name that is associated to the file. Victor holds grudges like heirlooms. Not a man who is inclined to silent forgiving. Victor files it away and then doesn't. He calls the meeting he has always called, the one that digs deep into family myths and pulls the strings that keep them taut. Suspicions give way to plans. Because the theater works best when the actors are unaware that the curtain has been lifted, Victor initially stays out of the public eye. He never does. He hires a reliable independent lab and orders an exhumation of documents and a modern forensic retest of samples using techniques that weren't available when the first test was conducted. Over the course of weeks, Victor watches each result come in like a chess player watching a pawn's slow advance. Daniel's genetic markers do not match the father listed on his original, the father Phyllis insisted on naming for the sake of a story that would protect him, but they do match a Newman line, which is not quite Victor's own DNA, but close enough to place Daniel squarely within the Newman family tree. The results are clean and devastating. The implication is huge. Phyllis's lie was not saving Daniel from Newman. It was pretending he belonged to a different family. Knowing that the truth will splinter allegiances, destabilize relationships, and present him with opportunities, Victor, with his signature surgical cruelty, chooses to use the revelation as leverage rather than as a means of reconciliation. He also understands how the public eats up identity scandals, so he crafts the reveal in a way that only Victor Newman could. Precise, public, and extremely humiliating. The disclosure, a bombshell in the boardroom. Standing behind the lectern, his face the color of cold iron, Victor takes the stage as an arbiter of truth rather than a patriarch requesting votes in the gilded room of Newman Enterprises' annual shareholder meeting, which is attended by board members, shareholders, the press, and members of every branch of the Newman family tree. With a voice heavy with dynastic weight, Victor says, "You all know the stories that hold this family together. But stories are fragile when built on falsehoods." He projects the first slide onto the screen, which includes lab seals, dates, and a synopsis of the forensic retest. As he lays out the chain of custody, step by step, the audience freezes. Then he drops the line that sends shivers through the room. Phyllis Summers is the one responsible for the sample being exchanged, and the paternity result attached to Daniel Romalotti's early documents is not real. Chairs clatter, and the cameras focus on Daniel, a board advisor and visitor at the conference, who has built his entire life around the persona Phyllis provided him. He appears to have been hit by a lightning strike. Victor goes one step further and presents the lie as something more serious than a personal secret. He displays contracts Daniel signed, including decisions made at Newman's subsidiaries, promotions accepted, and documents that partially depended on the veracity of the identity he had been given. Victor's punchline is shocking. Those documents are now legally suspect, and since Phyllis purposefully falsified official records, there may be serious legal ramifications. Victor has turned truth into a weapon. The cameras yell. The shareholders realize that their investments and the company's governance may have been jeopardized, and Victor sits back with an unconcerned expression, viewing the scene as a purging and a reassertion of power. The dismantling. Daniel is thrust into the middle of a storm he never anticipated, as the immediate fallout is swift. Lawyers storm into Newman Enterprises, regulators circle. The press covers the story like wildfire, not only because it's juicy, but also because it raises concerns about the integrity of contracts, governance, and financial stewardship. First, his job. Executives say the company needs to suspend him while an internal audit is conducted. Daniel's advisor role and the trust he built are destroyed overnight. Board votes are harsh and technical, citing conflict of interest, fabricated records, and the difficulty of oversight when identities are unclear. Daniel leaves the meeting room with his laptop and a cardboard box, shaking, not from cold, but from the shock of losing everything he believed to be stable. Second, his relationships. Those who supported him are compelled to turn away or lose their own footing. Some friends are practical, offering him a place to stay and keeping private advice. Others vanish into caution, making brief, measured statements. Summer, who is caught between two families, is confused and furious. She loved Daniel like a brother, but now she sees his life fall apart into a headline. Daniel feels the betrayal like a constant chill. Third, legal peril. The very contracts he signed, including partnerships, property transfers, and fiduciary decisions, are being examined by forensic experts. Prosecutors consider charging Daniel with falsified corporate records because Phyllis's document alteration may be interpreted as permitting fraud, even if Daniel signed them unknowingly. Friends speculate that Daniel may face conspiracy charges because, in the eyes of the law, ignorance is a dangerous defense when the paper trail suggests deliberate falsification. The trial in public. When the cameras show her face on the morning shows, people view her as a villain. Phyllis doesn't run away. She faces the storm, but not without internal conflict. She always planned to confess at some point, she tells herself, but not like this or on television. Her justification that she changed the records to protect a child from being used as leverage is overshadowed by outrage, legalese, and Victor's ruthless framing. The courtroom scenes, which feature prosecutors in sharp suits, defense attorneys desperately searching for exonerating evidence, and Daniel sitting at the defendant's table with his hands clenched, are dramatic theater. Daniel is thrust into a public trial, but his testimony, raw and contradictory at times, because some of what he believed to be facts were actually lies, humanizes him, but doesn't address the legal issues. The defense argues that Daniel was a victim, not a conspirator. The case is hazy and morally complex. Both sides are aware that a verdict will be as much about the public's desire for punishment as it is about the letter of the law. The prosecution presents a picture of a man whose legal persona was built on a false foundation. They contend that corporate governance depends on trust, and that every transaction is suspect if identity can be falsified. Before the judge weighs in, Daniel begins to lose in the court of public opinion. Sponsors withdraw their offers, clients terminate contracts, and friends of convenience take back their praise. Daniel is not only suffering legal repercussions, but he is also being socially unmade. The individual expenses. Daniel's larger collapse is private, the loss of a sense of self. He spends nights going through baby pictures, wondering if his childhood laughter was genuine or fake. He goes to his mother's closet and discovers the original baby bracelet, which smells like detergent and guilt. The cruelty of the arc is that the legal system only addresses a portion of the damage. Daniel's response is not the outrage the tabloids expect. He is hollowed out. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asks in a brittle voice, and Phyllis can't come up with a coherent response. She claims she was afraid of Newman, that she would lose him to a family that would take advantage of him. But that fear is a poor excuse for changing the legal documents that controlled his life. Phyllis and Victor had forgotten that identity is a scaffolding on which trust leans. Once it is shaken, the entire structure trembles. Daniel's romantic relationship or friendships, depending on where you place him in your mind, fray as intimacy becomes a crucible. Those who dated him because of his identity or status feel betrayed, while those who stayed test their patience. The assault and the breakdown. Despite his power, Victor is always cautious. He doesn't stop with a public revelation. He has a strategic goal: to regain control over Newman's story and use Daniel as a lesson in obedience. He pushes the questions in ways that are clinically cruel. He slips into press-friendly statements that portray Daniel as reckless and compromised. He subtly pressures board members to stop funding anyone who publicly defends Daniel. It's a modern vendetta. Harm the man's reputation until he is expendable. Phyllis's lie becomes the key in a lock that, once turned, opens a floodgate of suspicion. And even Daniel's good deeds are reframed as opportunistic, a classic trauma of sudden shame. Direct attacks on Daniel's character begin to circulate. Rumors that he approved controversial deals and profited from insider access. The arc ends in a painfully quiet scene. Daniel sitting on a bench outside crimson lights as the city hums on. A man watching the life he knew evaporate, not in sparks and flames, but in the slow, corrosive grind of lost trust and erased opportunities. The pressure becomes unbearable, and he tries to find work outside Newman, but clients cancel. He tries to move, to disappear, but the story continues. Moral reckoning and legal resolution. The legal resolution is modest and bittersweet. Daniel is cleared of criminal conspiracy charges because the prosecution cannot prove he knowingly participated in the falsification, and the case against him for falsified corporate records is dropped when forensic accountants show transactions were not personally enriching him. The victory is Pyrrhic. His record is clean legally, but his public persona is scarred. If this were purely legal drama, the arc would end with a verdict or a plea, but soap operas deal in human aftermath. However, Phyllis pays a price. She is ordered to pay fines, perform community service, and make a public statement after being found guilty of forging documents and changing the chain of custody. The courtroom scene in which she apologizes to Daniel is heartbreaking. Although she says the words, they fall short of what has been lost. Victor offers a gloved fist as an olive branch. He suggests a peaceful resolution that would place Daniel under a Newman mentorship and restore some of his position, but at a price. Daniel would have to sign papers admitting the truth, give up some inheritance rights, and take on a role that would require him to rely on Victor's kindness. What kind of restoration is that for a man whose life has been ruined by lies? Victor presents it as a gesture of kindness, but many see it as a power struggle that would keep Daniel bound to the Newman machine. Although it is a commendable decision, Daniel's refusal to give his life away to repurchase a portion of what was taken would ruin his chances of succeeding in Genoa City. A life's end in exile. Daniel decides to go into exile, which is a slow, dignified withdrawal rather than a dramatic escape. He departs Genoa City with a small carry-on and a head full of memories that cannot be replaced by a DNA test, and Phyllis watches him go, feeling each step he takes as if it were a physical wound. "I kept you safe," she whispers, but no one hears her. The destroyed forever line is not literal death. It is the death of a civic identity, the loss of a career, and the erosion of familial trust. Daniel is not dead, but the world he knew, his place in Genoa City, his name's currency, is gone. For him, the consequences are lifelong. He will never easily regain the status that was taken from him. He will carry the stigma of the scandal like a scar. The point of the story is not where he goes. Rather, it is the cost of a lie and how it can unmake. Fault lines and aftershocks. The arc ends with forward looks that set the stage for months of storytelling. And Genoa City never forgets dramatic fissures lightly. As she attempts to rebuild, Phyllis sends letters to Daniel, whom he occasionally reads and occasionally does not, engages in philanthropy, operates a small boutique, and reluctantly speaks in public about moral ambiguity. Her relationship with Daniel serves as the focal point of her guilt and redemption arc. Victor, who feels that he did what was required to preserve the Newman legacy, sits back in his office and watches the empire stabilize. If he is satisfied, it tastes metallic, since he knew that he had used truth as a weapon. He learns new rhythms, trades the press for quiet work, and gradually starts to find a self that is not defined by scandal. However, the opportunities that might have been, the career, reconnections, the public life, are gone, and he will always be, in Genoa City's ledger of names, the man who lost everything because the person who loved him chose to lie. Daniel carves out a life elsewhere, quietly, far from tabloids, and possibly in a city that doesn't know his story. Summer's activism is bittersweet, a memorial to the brother she witnessed being abducted. And she goes on to become a public advocate for truth and identity, building an institute that helps people confront family secrets. The reason it hits home. Victor's reveal is brutal but effective. He used the mechanics of power to turn a private mistake into a public disaster. This arc works because it's not about a single revelation, but rather how small decisions reverberate over decades. Phyllis's lie was, in her mind, a compassionate deception. But in the web of legal paperwork, corporate governance, and public narratives, a lie turns into a weapon that cuts anyone who stands between the blade and the hilt. This story's central question is, what is identity? Is it based on DNA, documents, or the love you receive from others? And when the two are at odds, who has the authority to choose which truth is true? The story's arc provides messy, unsatisfactory answers, as real life frequently is, and leaves characters altered in ways that are difficult to reverse. Teasers, upcoming events. An NBC-style subplot emerges that suggests an older Newman colleague is more culpable than initially thought after someone in Genoa City discovers the original lab technician's notes, a secret notebook that raises the possibility that Phyllis was coerced. A boardroom confrontation is set up when Victor receives an unexpected challenge from a young board member who wonders whether he used the truth as a cudgel rather than a correction. When he is drawn back to Genoa City by an art exhibit or startup, Daniel's slow-building existence elsewhere meets with Genoa City. The return is complex, and acceptance is not assured. Phyllis must decide whether to keep the remainder of the secret hidden and preserve the tenuous peace, or to reveal further information in order to clear someone she still loves.